Well, this morning, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar seemed to confirm that the Ukrainians are observing exactly that transfer of Wagner mercenaries to regular Russian army troops on the outskirts of Bakhmut. She said they weren't observing it at the moment in the city centre where Wagner mercenaries remain. But that's consonant with what Yevgeny Prigozhin has been saying, which is that they'll fully pull out by June the 1st. Slightly oddly, he added that he was going to leave two what he described as elite members of the Wagner forces in the city centre in Bakhmut to help out. I remind you, Ukraine has not recognised having fully lost control of Bakhmut. They say they still hold some positions on the western outskirts of the city. What Ukrainian commanders there are saying, have been telling my colleague from France 24 Spanish channel anyway, is that Ukraine's plan is to push the Russians back further on the northern and southern outskirts of the city and then sort of try to force them back into the city centre and then bombard them when they're there. That's Ukraine's strategy to take back Bakhmut in the medium term. Whether or not they'll be able to pull it off, though, is another question.
Now, Gulliver, the leader of Wagner was also very critical about Russia's response to a cross-border attack into the Belgorod region a few days ago. There are some concerns about who carried out that incursion and with what equipment. What more do we know about that?
Exactly. Initially, in Ukraine anyway, these incursions into Russia, which were carried out by Russian citizens, members of two paramilitary battalions, if you like, that have been fighting on the Ukrainian side, but who are Russians who are against Vladimir Putin, was received with sort of rapturous applause, basically, because of the way the Russians seemed to be in disarray. These Russian paramilitaries had revealed the weakness of Russian defences in the region, caused Russian citizens to panic, and shown that the Russian authorities didn't really seem to have a ready response, and also distracted attention towards those Russian regions of Belgorod, away from Bakhmut. Perhaps not only attention, perhaps also some military equipment. But then there are pictures that have emerged of US-made Humvees apparently being used there, apparently by these Russian paramilitary groups. That's led the United States to voice limited concerns about it. I mean, these aren't exactly offensive weapons, they're armoured vehicles, but still the principle under which Ukraine's allies have been providing it with military equipment has been that it won't be used to attack targets in Russia. And that could be an argument that might be used against US attempts to persuade allies to give Ukraine more today at an online meeting that the Pentagon is hosting with other allies of Ukraine. Worries that the Ukrainians might break this rule of not using the equipment to attack Russia, a rule that the Western allies of Ukraine say is necessary to avoid provoking Vladimir Putin. But the idea of provoking Vladimir Putin is something that is constantly ridiculed in Ukraine, because what the Ukrainians argue is that you can't provoke him anymore. What he actually responds to is weakness and not to strength, and the Ukrainians would argue that what's happened in Belgorod region shows exactly that. Another criticism of these incursions into Belgorod region is also that they have been carried out by Russians who, some of them anyway, are pretty much bona fide Indian Nazis. It's quite easy to prove that some of these guys are white supremacists. This is happening at exactly the same time as Ukraine is trying to court Africa. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, is in Addis Ababa today talking about how much he wants Ukraine's relations with African countries to improve, and also how determined Ukraine is to keep being able to provide grain and other agricultural products to African countries. The fact that the Ukrainians don't seem to have a problem with associating themselves with white supremacists in this way is raising eyebrows in some places, though the Ukrainians would say that they don't really have a choice. They can't persuade the Ukrainian liberals to take up arms, and so they'll take whatever they can get.